a question, and now I want to go. And the question was, what concerns you most about the 2025 finance bill? What concerns you most about the 2025 finance bills? And a quick through, I'll go through some of your feedback on X, where Othiembo says every year taxes go up, but there's still no employment. Now even essentials like data and electronics are being taxed more. This kills innovation and opportunities for the youth. Those are just sentiments from one user, Othiembo, on X. And another user, Wamboy, says, I started a small online business, but this finance bill will raise operational costs. Taxes on internet services and imports are pushing us out of business. It's discouraging. That's one entrepreneur who says that the introduction of taxes on the internet is going to disadvantage them the most. Elvis say we rely on digital platforms and recording equipment. Now those are being taxed heavily. This bill punishes young creatives instead of supporting them. And you know that the digital economy supports most of our young people who are out here jobless. And Judge Minor on X says the cost of living is already high, and this bill introduces even more taxes. School fees, food, electricity, everything is going up, but salaries stay the same. It's unfair. And those are sentiments from George. And then we go to Facebook, where Salim Bakari says, we choose to be self-employed instead of waiting for jobs. But every year there's a new fee or tax. We are doing our best, but the system is against us. That is sentiment from Bakari. And Mweni says, I sell tea and coffee to feed my children, but now milk, sugar and gas are too expensive. How do they expect us to survive with all these taxes? That is Mwene's question. And Musa Mwadi says, I repair phones for a living, but parts are getting more expensive because of new taxes. If this continues, I'll have to shut down my business. Those are some of the sentiments. Chip Kemoy says, every time a new finance bill comes in, our shopping basket shrinks. Food is becoming unaffordable. We feel abandoned by those who we elected. That's Nancy Chepkemoy. There's sentiments on the new on the 2025 finance bill that is promising to be a bit lean. And as you can see, some comments from there, young people are saying maybe this particular finance bill does not favor them. But I'll take you back to Linda in studio, maybe to dissect some of those issues raised in the comment section and dissecting this particular finance bill.
Well, thank you so much, Bentura Komboka, from the other side. And two things really stood out just before we went on that short commercial break. Ramogi was talking about the issues dealing with zero-rate products moved to exempt. And one thing really stood out, transportation of sugarcane, from farm to the factory has been moved to exempt. And there's another issue as well, the issue of animal feeds. And ultimately, everything will boil down to the common mwananchi. The cost will ultimately be pushed or passed to the common mwananchi. And the government is speaking about easing the cost of living. Well, I don't know what the experts think about this. What do you make of this, Gideon?
Thank you so much, Linda. Maybe where I start from is, I know we've placed so much emphasis on the VAT,
yes,
but maybe just to give clarity is that the finance bill seeks to amend various tax laws. So there is the corporate income tax, there is the value-added tax, there is what is called the Tax Procedures Act, which is ideally from an administrative perspective. There is excise duty.
Yes.
There is another one called the miscellaneous fees, which ideally deals with certain levies when we're importing products. So there are various proposals contained in this bill, cutting across all these taxes.
Yeah.
Then there are also the personal taxes, which ideally will affect you in terms of the salaries that are payable. But then coming to your question in terms of the exemption, the zero rating, which had earlier been explained, and I really don't want to belabor so much about that one. But typically what happens is for an exempt product, we are saying it's a product that doesn't have VAT completely, but a zero-rated product has VAT, but at 0%. So those are two different. When you receive an invoice that has VAT at 0, it clearly shows VAT 0% with a 0. But an exempt, you won't see VAT anywhere. As earlier mentioned, there are certain implications. So if it is a zero-rated supply, so that invoice that I have, remember if it's a zero-rated supply, and I'll maybe take an example of bread which is zero rated. So if I'm in the business of the bread business, so my output or whatever I'm supplying to every other person is zero rated. However, remember I'm incurring inputs. I have electricity. So the electricity I'm being charged, there's input VAT that time, there's a 16% cost. If I'm renting the premise, there's a 16%. So all this VAT that I'm being charged, cumulatively, it will either become a cost to me or it's a cost that I need to pass on to someone. Because essentially VAT is a consumption tax. And what I mean by consumption, it is to be borne by the very final consumer in that supply chain. So the intermediary...
Which majorly is the common money, right? Yeah?
Yes. So the intermediaries usually pass on the cost. So there's what is called input and output until it is borne by the very final consumer. Now, if you exempt a product, what ideally that means from now zero rated, what it means, the product I'm supplying is exempt, so no VAT. However, I'm still incurring all these inputs. So on electricity, on rent, whichever. So what happens to these inputs that I'm incurring, I'll take on, but because I'm not able to recover through various mechanisms, I'll possibly factor them as a cost when coming up to the cost
as
of the
the end
product.
cost, yes.
Yes, to the end. And really maybe one key thing, and perhaps government should consider, is that zero rating is not a very bad idea. It's not unique to Kenya. Most jurisdictions use refunds as a way of incentivizing. So ideally, it is a way of incentivizing various sectors in the economy.
At the expense of who?
Yes, now at the expense of who? When you check, so there are certain policy papers that were released by Treasury last year, 2023-2024. So there's a paper known as the Medium-Term Revenue Strategy paper, and there's a National Tax Policy paper. When you look at the Medium-Term Revenue Strategy paper, it talks about limiting exemptions to critical sectors of the economy. And then if it's about zero rating, then limit them to mostly exports. Now, when we look at this finance bill, what does it do? It is now taking some items to exempt, okay? But then, are these critical to the economy? Some of the items that are being proposed to be moved from zero rating to exempt, you've talked about the animal feeds. We know the ramifications. You've talked about transportation of sugarcane. There's the healthcare. Inputs used for manufacture of pharmaceutical products will now be exempt. But then there's even a critical proposal whereby specialized equipment used in the construction of hospitals is not even being moved to exempt. It is being moved from exempt to
zero rate.
No, to standard. To standard. So there are various movements in terms of various goods and services. But in a nutshell, what I'm just saying is I don't think zero rating is so bad. What the government needs to do is just ensure that whoever is applying for the refunds gets that refunds due. If you do appreciate the refund procedure, the Revenue Authority usually undertake very, very critical analysis and review before you're paid. It undergoes various stages. So I do believe rather than the government just banishing and saying we don't want refunds, I think it's also an incentive. It is used to incentivize certain sectors, very critical to the economy, the health sector. It could be education, which is still, I would say, is still exempt. So those very critical sectors of the economy.
Let me move to Abraham as well, just to pick your thoughts on the same. Even as the government is trying to seal some tax leaks and loopholes, do you feel like this is a good move, especially in an era where everyone is struggling about the cost of living?
Yeah, so first of all, the cost of living is largely driven by the fact that there is not much money that is circulating in the economy. And therefore, you have very little money, and the products, because first of all, real wages in terms of salaries and incomes that people are getting have not necessarily been improving. I think for me, I lean more towards the fact that government is trying to make sure, or rather government's job should be to make sure that first of all, the process of VAT refunds, which first of all has been taking forever, that has
it's
been
not
affected.
been seamless.
So producers of different products and sellers and what have you opt then to just transfer these costs, to
the consumer.
To consumer, because you don't know when this refund will ever come. But having said that, I think, and I agree with Gideon, that perhaps zero rating is not necessarily a bad thing. But what about standardizing VAT for all products, but at a lower rate? That will reduce the problem of who is claiming refunds and what have you. And that definitely, because as long as you have variations, you remember the argument about increasing it from 8% to 16% on petroleum products was that you have different, you have different operating rates, which basically makes tax administration, because tax administration should be certain in that. But secondly, I think when we look at VAT as VAT only, I think we miss a mark. Because VAT, as he has said, is a consumption tax. That tax is only as good as there are incomes, and as long as incomes are not there, then it doesn't matter what operational rate you work with. You still have a challenge, because look at inflation, which basically is the rise in cost of goods year on year. Last year, it went down to about 4.5%, when you look at the full year. But the previous years, it was at 6%, 7%. At one point, it was even at 8%. Without incomes improving, then it means already the cost of goods has actually grown by that. And when you look at the driver, for instance, of production, which energy is a big part of it. And where you're thinking energy in terms of kerosene, kerosene, diesel, and petroleum. And therefore, I think it is important to look at all these aspects of the different taxation measures and what they do to the economy. But secondly, I think allow me to bring in this discussion that as long as government is a main player in the credit market, because if the cost of credit, because the other inputs.
Do you feel like the government is the biggest?
Yeah, no, right now it is. Look at how do we know this? The government has been running a deficit. A deficit is the difference between expenditure and income of about 800 billion. 800 billion in a budget of about, so say about 20, sometimes about 30% or thereabout of the total of how much revenue you are likely to raise. Now that money is being borrowed from the market through bonds and bills. The biggest portion of it, initially, last year, the strategy, I think last year the strategy was to borrow more in the international market because it's cheaper at a cheaper interest rate. But that has since changed, and even this year, it has also changed. So what happens? Government borrows at, and now it's reducing, but at one point government was borrowing at 18%. So if government borrows at 18%, when a manufacturer or a retailer or any business person goes to borrow from the bank gives you at 21%. What business can you do to be able to make a return of 21%?
Exactly.
And the reason why I brought that discussion is because that is what is affecting those who are able to still produce to make sure that the markup is slightly higher because of these other externalities that are beyond just the operational rate of VAT, in my opinion. And interestingly, and we are waiting for the final numbers from KRA, VAT and income tax are actually the taxes that are actually taking a dip or are stagnant, which tells you something very interesting. It tells you that actually there is no movement because those two are a measure of whether people are consuming goods and services.
It's not in circulation
in the economy. That's my take.
But well, since you brought the issue of debt, I'm just wondering with the status of the economy so far, is there a likelihood that we'll see an increase in debt and borrowing as well?
So not that there's a likelihood. The numbers are already clear. So of all documents that we are saying are not available, at least we have the budget books of the Treasury.
And what does that really mean, especially to Kenyans?
Allow me just to get there.
Yes.
So when you look at the budget for this year, which has now been reduced from about 4.2 to 4.1 trillion, let me bring the numbers down. So it's been moved from 4,200 to about 4,100. Out of that, we are expecting to collect a revenue. So there are two kinds of revenue. So there's the ordinary revenue, which is the taxes we pay, but then there's what we call appropriations in aid. Basically, other charges. When you go to apply for your passport, you pay something. When you go to do a land transfer, you pay some stamp duty and the like. So totally, we are expecting about 3,300. Take it. So you still have a difference of about 800, give and take, 800 shillings. Now that 800 shillings is the amount of money we are planning to borrow. So now remember, this 3,300 is if you meet all your tax targets.
Obligations,
But let me bring it down. Out of these 3,300, okay, let's move it even further down because actual target for ordinary revenue is about 2,900. 1,900 is going to debt repayment.
Absolutely.
So it was at 1,600, it's been revised upwards.
Yeah.
So already you're saying more than half. You can do the math.
Yes.
1,900 divided by 2,900, you are literally left with just about 1,000.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Are we operating with a broke government? I know.
Yes.
But finish first your point.
I'm short of saying that we are running a broke government. But the reality is that our debt repayment, and the CS Treasury said, tighten your belts, it's until 2034 that there will be a relief. The debt repayment amount is too high. And what tells us that the amount is too high? If you add what we call the totality of the consolidated fund services, which basically is debt, payment of constitutional offices, pensions, government pensions, you already are at 2,100. Do your math. 2,900. If you meet the target.
If
you meet
underline
the
target.
The further down you come,
you
know, the bigger the deficit on the other on the other side. 2,100 is mandatory spending.
What then is the biggest?
What that means is the crisis now you have delays in transfers of capitation. You have delays in payment, and at the end of the financial year, you now have this huge amount of pending bills. Because government now consumes services. Back to the private sector that I talked earlier about, who is already borrowing, took an LPO at 21% from the bank, now is not even being paid by the same government that crowded. So the reality is that our debt repayment, from where I sit, and this is not necessarily even the position of Budgeti Hub as an organization, I think it's time to start discussing restructuring.
And let me just ask this, Neema, especially when it comes to, the government says it's reduced the expenditure. That's one of their biggest flex, whereby the budget from this particular numbers has gone down to, has dropped. Do you think this will really help boost the economy?
Now, I think my take on that takes me back to service delivery and the fact that these are not just numbers. When we speak about reducing expenditure, we're speaking about reducing budget lines. We're speaking about this trickling down to the service being delivered. And allow me to take you to the health sector when it comes to budget estimates. In the health sector, we saw USAID withdrawal and what that looked like. That's an example of a reduction in expenditure. And we saw the adverse effects that it had to the sector itself. Now, in the budget estimates of 2025-2026 financial year, we're seeing a 700 million increase roughly in the health sector. Now, when you look at specific budget lines, two priorities we had in the health sector. We had the primary health care, especially when it comes to infrastructure, and we had maternal care and child care. Now, these two things were priorities in the BPS. Now, for us to see what a cut in expenditure looks like, two things. One, the allocation. Two, we can also look at the key performance indicators. But allow me to look at the allocation side. Now, for primary healthcare that was stated as a priority, we can see that indeed when it comes to expenditure, it has been given an increase. Now, the increase specifically to development, which we were speaking about infrastructure, we are seeing a 10.5 million increase. So we are seeing that when we don't cut up on expenditure, we're able to meet our priorities, we're able to deliver the services to citizens. Now, it comes to maternal health care and childcare. Under the under the health sector, it has a cut of about 77 million shillings. Now that is expenditure being cut. So asking the question of whether this has an impact, it has a huge impact. Because then it means we are cutting down on expenditure on real services to these mothers and children at the health facilities. We cannot state that we want to prioritize maternal health care, yet also something really important that we noticed is Linda Mama, which was there and was very important to service delivery for mothers, is no longer there in the budget estimates that have just come out.
It's a double-sided sword.
Exactly. So we cannot stand and say expenditure is just a number that we are cutting. When we talk about that deficit, when we talk about the fact that the government wants to decrease expenditure, you know, it also begs the question, where are we placing these cuts? Because we are seeing some, you know, renovations in State House, and I'm not saying renovations are bad in State House, but then at the expense of very delicate budget lines.
Absolutely.
We are cutting on school feeding, we are cutting on maternal mothers, we are cutting on vulnerable people like senior citizens. Then that begs the question on, yes, a cut is important when we get to a point where, you know, we are struggling with a deficit. But then we also have to make a choice on what are we going to prioritize when it comes to protecting from cuts.
Well, thank you so much. That's the best way to argue about this. So whether the priorities that are set by the government are really going to make an impact. But then let me come to you, our Gen Z, Sophie. What really worries you when you get to see all these figures thrown around and inheriting such burden? What really comes to your mind, and what would you really recommend?
What worries me is what the common Mwananchi has to sacrifice to survive. For instance, if you walk around in many towns and cities now, you'll realize there are very many street families now. Why are there many street families? Because they can't afford to rent a house. Very many children's lives are going to waste because their parents cannot afford to take them to school. But their parent is like, if I can't even afford a meal, how can I afford to take you to school? Just stay around with me. And so that's what is really worrying. My question really to the experts here at the table, I'm not a financial expert, but in terms of tax refunds, in November 1st, 2024, the President of Kenya was noted saying that the government spends too much money on refunds. He even quoted the bread bakeries. And he said, like, why would we be spending 400 billion on refunds? So in terms of the medium-term revenue strategy that Mr. Gideon has mentioned here, we have already established that this current finance bill and even the previous one was not in line with that medium-term strategy. So my question to them would be, how then can we ensure that in future finance bills, and even this one that is currently being debated,
there's an alignment?
Exactly. How? Because the medium-term revenue strategy is aimed at, of course, improving collection and improving implementation of those taxes. But how then can we ensure that that also is capped, that the government does not reduce expenditure on critical and essential services, but yet again ensure that people are not evading paying taxes, and these taxes are doing what they're supposed to do. And also, the government is seen to increase the number of days that it takes to actually get that refund. So it's 90 days to 120 days now. We're seeing this particular finance bill grant the Treasury CS the power to waiver whatever tax penalties someone has. So how can we ensure that certain documents and certain laws that have been put in place are actually implemented to safeguard the common Mwananchi?
So 2 questions for our experts here, but before then, let's get to engage our panelists on the other side. Mumbi Chege, tell us? We've really dived into the zero rate right here as well. It's a pertinent issue. What do you have for now?
Linda, and of course you've tackled the issue of curbing wastage in the Kenya Kwanza government. President Ruto has been really big talking about, living within our means, but we still see every now and then you hear an advisor has been appointed on a cabinet level. You will hear there's allocation in this budget estimate, 2025-2026 of around, I think, 2.3 billion on State House repairs. So, Njogu, let me come to you. What is so hard for this government to have in line, have in check? What should be our priorities?
I think this is just basically what I've observed over time. The president or the government is trying to reward rather than prioritize on the common need of Mwananchi. The way they came up with a list of quite a number of advisors and quite a number of people, some of them are in secretary level, principal secretary level and cabinet level, tells me that, the first of all, the wage bill will go up. And number two, rather than concentrating on, let's say, making the SHA and the affordable or education and sanitary and everything else work, is more priority on giving people job. And that's why perhaps we feel there's a bit of municipality on allocating of resources by the government. What the government should be doing technically should be more of incentivizing the MNE and SME to make sure that, give more incentive in the tax or finance bill to make the economy work. Because we notice the economy last year was around there about 5.4% grew on the GDP, and it have gone down to 4.7%. So what they could have concentrated now is to make sure that they have the policies in place to rejuvenate that, to bring the consumption back. And because most of the taxes come through indirect way, more of VAT, excess duty, right, more than the POI and the income tax, that consumption then ignite the economy, and that economy then bring in the income tax directly, because the company will be growing. But when we misprioritize and give more jobs to people, basically you're even struggling to see the value they are bringing to the government, right, rather than now concentrating on making the business work, looking at the basic principles that have been provided in the Constitution, like the education, the health, the security, and many other investments that could have come in place. I feel that's where the government need to be put into responsibility, to put into track in such a way that they are more concentrating on rejuvenating the economy. They concentrate more on giving the basic priority to people and give more incentive and make the economy more back again. The incentive that were given by FY25 bill was a bit minimal, because it's more of dominion of capital allowances of 100% on maybe the hotel industry, the agro industry, agriculture industry. But it could have done more to make sure that we ignite the process. If you notice, the inflation have been quite low, but the economists can tell you, and my colleague here can tell you, right, that economy or the inflation have been low because there is no activity that have been happening. Most of the investors are mute. They are observing. They are wondering what next. And there is a lot of even things that are happening in the economy, such as international arena, where Trump is giving more tariff. Now, right now, the USAID in Kenya is kind of going down. Right. And that caused even for the government to be more tighter, because like I hear, USAID used to contribute around 86 billion Kenya shilling to the Kenyan economy and Kenyan budget. But now it's not there. So that caused for government to even become tighter, as well as look at the balancing act on how to ignite the economy, bringing even more zero-rated, in my opinion, and giving more incentive on the income tax, giving more relief, so the money come back to the economy, and then tax it indirectly.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me get Ramogi's views on this. Let's talk about the informal sector for a second, because there seems to be a huge gap. How can the government better integrate them? You know, there are a lot of reforms in this finance bill that are touching on them. How can the government better loop them in, integrate them in this whole system, and also expand the tax base?
There's a book I read. It's called The Startup Nation, and it talks about the Israeli nation. The good gentleman in Israel set up a fund of $1 billion US dollars. And this fund was the enterprise fund. You have an idea, any idea, just go to the government and say, I have an idea. And you go and you try it. You fail, you can still come back after failing. So it's, they give you license to fail. You can still come back, and that's how a lot of technology came from that country. That today a lot of the technology we use is actually Israeli. When this administration came to power, one of the things they said they will prioritize is micro and small enterprises. We've not seen that advanced since they came to power. I think Moses Kuria tried with the county aggregation and investment parks. But even then, it was more of a venue of doing business than an alignment of policy and a provision for capitation. So I think there is a failure on that. But allow me, before perhaps you move to a colleague, to say something that my brother Abraham said, respond to it. We see a lot of things together, but he's the politer version. I am not so polite. I say things in black and white. Rugo is saying we need to start having a conversation about debt restructuring. Because the biggest risk to our public finance today, the biggest problem, the biggest headache, is no longer even corruption. I mean, corruption takes a third of our revenue, and that is a problem. But the biggest problem we have right now, the biggest risk to our public finance is debt, public debt. And so we need to have that conversation. But we are not having that conversation necessarily because of where we are, but we are having that conversation because all the graphs that you can project right now send you to a point where we are going to default. I cannot tell you when, and I cannot tell you how, but I know for a fact that if we go in the same direction we are going, our debt is no longer sustainable. We are still going to borrow. We still have a deficit of around 4.5%. The economy is shrinking, literally shrinking. He's mentioned that. We are not creating jobs. Where are you going to get the additional revenue to pay the additional debt that you're going to collect? Essentially speaking, our economy is going to be felt if we don't do anything about it. And so there is an urgent need to have the debt restructuring conversation, not because of where we are. Where we are is already bad, but there's a worse place we are getting to if we don't have that conversation now.
That's quite interesting. I also want to get your views on another issue that Linda had mentioned, one of our guests, on the digital asset tax, the reduction from 3% to 1%. You know, we want to understand when these taxes are being imposed, for instance, because is the whole issue about just imposing more taxes, taxes? What is the thinking behind it? What is the rationale behind it? And why the reduction now?
Thank you. Why the reduction? First of all, why did they even put it at first? And he said he read a book. For me, as a reverend, I interact with people, Wanjiko, and so I would even also answer that with something that could have happened. It is said that there is this teacher who got his salary in cash, entered in a matatu, and then somebody stole the money from his pocket. And then, so when the makanga wanted to get the fare, the man checked, he did not have any money.
Right.
So the makanga, the driver were quarreling, hey, you man. So this man who had stolen the money looked at the man and said, oh, sorry, maybe I can pay for you, and so that you can. So everybody there was congratulating this man, say, oh, you have. Everybody else was just quarreling this man, but this man has good heart.
Right.
So I want to say the government is just like that thief. He steals from you, and then after some time he gives you something. I have reduced something. So on this conversation, and you also said in your introduction how the budget is even bringing money to renovate the state house that has already
was renovated last year.
Renovated. So the question there is, do we have the right people?
Right.
Even I think the whole question is not about the finance bill 2025, but who are the drivers who are doing that? Because for me, I would think somebody who would even put down a pen on such a proposal is the wrong person, harboring the wrong in the wrong place. And because history repeats itself, I want to state that, and I hope several people have heard with what happened in 2025 or 2024 June with the Gen Zs, and somebody has said maybe the government is thinking that the Gen Zs and the millennial they just gave up, and but somebody has said they went for halftime. They have been strategizing. I have been in various meetings where these people have come together. They are trying to strategize and see what's the solution. So as my brother, the economist, has said, things seems to be going worse. He used the word badder and worse.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So I want to say even now prophetically that things are very soon we are going to see a change, because we believe that the young people are taking over very soon.
I don't know if I can compliment his answer on digital asset tax.
Thank you, Mr. Ramogi. Mr. Njogu, do you think the Kenya Kwanza regime has learned, how much Kenyans can take in terms of, taxes that are being imposed on them? We have a lot to see in the coming days. It's the finance bill has been presented, in Parliament. It's yet to go through first, second, and of course the second reading, and of course the committee stage. But do you think it's learned its lesson?
I can say partially yes, and the reason is the proposal that you see in the FY25 is more driven by, they are coming in indirectly. It's not the harsh one that we saw in FY24 bill. So they have learned in terms of presenting hard stand and bringing quite heavy proposals and lists that they can choke the economy at once. So they are going slowly and slowly. So they have learned in terms of how they can calmer. The only thing I've noted that they haven't learned is how do you make the economy jumpstart again. So they haven't learned in terms of which incentive can make my economy that is reading 4.7 now to make it 5.4 or 5.6. The recovery. Process. That I feel it's very sluggish on that.
Right.
But in terms of bringing new proposals, they are quite mute. The proposals we see are not as heavy as we thought they will be. But I feel that silence as well can work against us.
Okay.
Because in my opinion, they should have come up with even better proposals to make more incentive to the businesses, and to bring in more economy to rejuvenate, as I earlier articulated, and also to bring people into that positivity, to bring the business, the business is driven by hope and trust, and the trust within the government.
Okay.
It seems as if now the trust is a bit low, so the government needs to work hard to make it more work.
Regaining
so I believe that it's in a very slow state. It have learned, but not very the way we want, and we need to move faster.
All right.
And, be willing to give incentive to the businesses.
All right, thank you so much. Let me cross over to the other side, to Linda, to continue with this conversation. Linda?
Well, Mumbi, I heard there's a prophecy made right there. We are keen. We'll be watching and seeing what will really pan out. But well, with our discussion here today, Sophie had 2 questions to our panelists, and one was on revenue collection vis-a-vis the expenditure, as well as the alignment on the government in regards to when their criteria, which criteria does the government use when it comes to aligning their priorities, right? Well, perhaps we can take it up from Gideon.
Thank you so much. And maybe to answer Sophie, is first of all to appreciate that the governance structure in Kenya has evolved over time. Sophie, a few years ago, you will not even get this bill. It used to be presented in Parliament when the budget is being read, and the proposals took effect that same midnight.
It was secretive.
It was so secretive. But
Why
then
was that though? Was it to just implement it?
Yeah,
to just throw it on you?
So it's a bill tabled and takes effect immediately. But here today we are discussing the bill. So it's a journey. Then I believe the other thing, in terms of this medium-term revenue strategy paper, the national tax policy, Kenya has never had these papers. It's the very first time since independence. So I believe it's a journey. We are somewhere, but then there's much more needed in terms of accountability. The constitution that we did pass, Article 201, still provides for openness, accountability when it comes to matters financial management. So how are we taking those responsible to account? So we just need all these voices that are coming out need to be amplified. We just need to ensure that we are adhering to the set laws. The medium-term revenue strategy paper, the implementation is intended to end in 2027. But are we seeing that ending? Are we already seeing some of those proposals contained in that? I don't think so. So part of the proposal is that paper was to reduce the likes of the VAT rate, as Hugo mentioned, reduce this rate. 16%, we might argue ours is the lowest in the region, but if in Africa we have countries, Nigeria is at 7.5% VAT rate on essentially almost everything. So I think there's still room to reduce the rate. And then by that you are going to expand your tax base, bring more people, where you are able to circulate more money in the economy.
Yeah, perhaps Abraham, you can take that as well.
No, I completely agree. The big concern for me is you can increase taxes, you can do all that, but if resources are not being spent for what they are meant for, we have a problem. If the pronouncements of the Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury, the pronouncements by the President, the reports by the Office of the Auditor General are anything to go by, we basically are wasting money through theft. I think it's right.
Budget and corruption.
Yes.
It's even beyond budgeted corruption, is theft. That's what the CS called it. And we know the option for thieves, literally. If today I disappeared with your iPad, the options are very clear on what happens to me. So I think that rule of law becomes a very critical place, because when you think about education sector, which has got the highest amount in terms of budget, education is the second MDA. The first one is paying debt. It's debt servicing, and then you have education. Do we spend all the money for the purposes for which now we have an increase of about 23 billion TSC to employ more teachers? Will we? Is that a quality improvement in that sense, or just employment creation, as it were? So accountability questions. Both on the revenue side, how much is being collected, is all of it being accounted for? We have had questions around tax leakages, monies that are not, and again, it's important to also remember, we have a devolved system of government. Whatever we are discussing today is for the national government, but it's important for citizens to know that a similar process is being replicated at the county level.
Exactly.
So there are estimates being tabled at the county assembly. There are estimates both of revenue and expenditure being tabled at the county at the county level. We have not taxes. Most of them are levies and fees being collected at that county level. Are they all being accounted for? So there's accountability both on the revenue side, but there's also accountability on the expenditure side.
But accountability really is the main issue.
No, it's the main issue
Gen Zs. And perhaps before you chime into that, as you also give your final thoughts on this particular topic, it's a pertinent issue of accountability.
No, it's true.
Yes, we are collecting X amount, but budgeted corruption is taking a chunk of it. And well, if this is not tackled, then we might see ourselves on the streets again.
Sadly, yes, because every year we have about 1 million Kenyans who join the job market.
Yeah.
If you're saying the accountability questions have not been answered, manufacturing sector is not necessarily growing the way it should grow, even the housing sector, you know, where we should actually be putting in more money, the numbers don't show any growth. In fact, even cement consumption, which is a big driver of, you know, of housing, is actually on the lower side, which is interesting.
Which the government actually argues that it's the biggest employer.
I think the numbers are not.
The numbers are lying.
The numbers from government, because the economic survey was released yesterday, you know, and it doesn't say, you know, what is being said. But the point I'm trying to say is, because accountability questions are not being answered, the cost of living is going up. Everybody is being affected, you know, in that sense. And two, what you are seeing, unfortunately, is first an expansion of government. So you are seeing more slots being created at the senior government level. But two, you are not seeing a lot of effort to dealing with one area of expenditure and management of our government, which is the state-owned enterprises, state-owned corporations, the state corporations as we call them, parastatals. People know them as parastatals. You have a whole list of them. You know,
duplication of jobs.
Duplication of jobs. They are the ones not. I said our budget is about, you know, our total budget is about 4.2, 4.1 trillion. The amount of loans that state corporations have not paid to date is 1.1 trillion. It's significant. Their total exposure in terms of risk, it's about 2.6, which is almost equivalent to the entire amount that we are planning to collect as revenue. So for me, those are areas that unless we address them, and it's a matter of, you know, immediate, I think this is critical. My last word.
Briefly,
yes,
because we have to get the
word.
feedback.
I think moving forward, we must prioritize the needs of citizens.
Thank you.
Government exists to provide services, and I think that's what you should focus on.
Well, thank you so much, Abraham Rugo, that's from Bajeti. But before we get some feedback, let's get your final thoughts as well, Neema. Briefly, though.
Okay. So briefly, allow me not to repeat on accountability and transparency. And I cannot speak for all Gen Zs, maybe not for some, but I can speak as one. And the issue of trust.
As two.
Yes.
You have two Gen
for
Zs
us in the room, So the issue of trust is really big, because one would argue the Finance Bill 2024, the experts can argue it had some things in it that were beneficial for us. But the fact that citizens do not trust how public funds are used, already we're rejecting the entire thing. We don't want to hear amendments, we want to hear rejection. So the issue of trust. Two, allow me to just call out for public participation. And I know when it comes to things like demonstration, it is a constitutional right, and peaceful demonstrations is a constitutional right that people can exercise. But the question is it sustainable? Because as much as it was a powerful demonstration, it made a statement, it brought out an awakening in the space. We cannot say that that is something sustainable that we can do each and every time, but we can call people for public participation in processes that are sustainable. And something, just as I finish,
Thank you, Neema. If you add on that, we'll really run out of time, but we truly appreciate it. I'll come back to you for your final feedback, Sophie and Gideon. But well, let's get to engage our audience who are watching us from home. Remember, we are live on K24 TV as well as Kameme TV. What do we have? But well, perhaps we can get some final thoughts from Mombe's panel before we get the feedback and we close this up.
Thank you so much, Linda Bentura. We'll be getting those feedback for us in just a moment. But let's just get final remarks from my panel tonight. Let's start with you, Odhiambo Ramogi, who is the Economist CEO, LM Capital Limited. Your final remarks?
Well, first of all, I'm so glad to be in the Kameme studio. This is my first time. I don't think I would have made it here. Delighted. But secondly, let me finish by saying where we are, where our economy is right now. I think it needs a safe pair of hands. We need some good stewardship. The aggressiveness of Kamau Thuge in CBK, you know, he pushed the interest rate up so that he can now bring down the inflation. We had hoped for something similar in taxes, just to lower the taxes, don't do something mild. But I see we have a conservative. Nonetheless, I think we need a steward that can steward us significantly into progressive changes, and also into institutional strengthening. I don't think we have seen that in the Finance Bill 2025. I am still hopeful.
All right, thank you so much. And Reverend Waiguru from
Yes.
Charismatic Church, your final remarks?
Yes, my final remarks from wahenga walisema dalili ya mvua ni mawingu.
Mawingu.
Dalili ya mvua ni mawingu.
Right.
And that's a message I would bring and I give to all Kenyans, that the clouds have been coming together. So very soon we might start seeing that we are just almost getting to the anniversary of what happened last year. And coincidentally, today I had some conversation of young people organizing a committee to have an anniversary. So I think that will bring a solution. And
Thank you so much. We are really out of time.
this is very, very important. The issue of Kenya and Haiti. And I know we'll maybe continue that conversation.
Okay.
I remember you said this, the CS Alfred Mutua, when the issue of Haiti came in, when they were taking the police, we had a discussion with him because I've been in Haiti for 3 years in my mission, and we were talking about trades between the two countries, but they never got that conversation.
right.
So that would be another
Thank
avenue.
you, Reverend
to-
Waiguru, for being here tonight. And of
Yes.
course, James Njogu, Head of Tax, Britam. Keep it really short. They've taken all your time. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. I'm quite excited to be among the panelists here to discuss. Just looking forward, looking for an exciting proposals that might make the economy jump start again from 4.7 to there about 5.5, 5.6. Looking at increasing more trust on the government and cutting on expenditure, where we prioritize on things that make sense to us,
Okay.
rather than other things that are not really making sense
All
to
right.
us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being here tonight. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, everybody who has been a part of this very important conversation. We appreciate you. My name is Mumbi Chege. I'll now be handing over to Linda Koskei. Linda, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Mumbi, for that insightful discussion right there. Let's just get quick feedback or your recommendations. If you were to meet the CS today, and what would you tell him briefly as you give your final remarks? 1 minute.
I would tell him that he needs to remember that sovereign power belongs to the people on that. My final remarks would be to say that as the Gen Z movement, we have not forgotten what happened last year in June, and we shall never forget. So what are we doing in the essence of not forgetting? We are organizing to take political power. We shall vote out this regime, and we shall work towards safeguarding the institutions that promote and restore the sovereignty of the people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Gideon, your final thoughts?
Thank you so much. Sophie has reminded me that Gen Z is not about age, it's about the
mood.
mindset, so I could also be a Gen Z.
Oh, you identify as
I'm a
Gen
Gen
Z.
Z, yeah.
You are Gen Z.
I'm Gen Z. Yeah, my final thoughts. So the bill, yes, has now moved to Parliament.
Yes.
So it's upon all of us to, again, just hold Parliament to account.
Yes.
I'm sure they're going to call for public participation. Let us all come out there, give our proposals. And again, a message to Parliament is not just to take on proposals for purposes of writing a report, but I do believe these are worthy proposals by various sectors of the economy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Gideon Rotich, who is the Associate Director, PwC. Many thanks for joining us here today. We also had Sophie Muriu. She's represented the Gen Z today. Thank you so much for representing. And also we had Dr. Abraham Rugo, who is from Budgeti Hub. Budgeti Hub Chief Executive Director at Budgeti Hub. Many thanks for creating time to be with us today. And we are also looking forward to the launch of your survey on Friday.
No, 23rd.
21st. Thank you. We are looking forward to that. And we also had Neema from Bajeti Hub, Neema Wangoe, Bajeti Hub program, support capacity building and learning. Another Gen Z, thank you so much. We truly appreciate you. But before we close these up, let's get some feedback. What are Kenyans saying? Who do we have? Ventura, what do we have today?
Very good insights on the Finance Bill 2025 from our experts in both studios. And remember, I was taking a feedback on your concerns about the Finance Bill 2025. And our question was, what concerns you most about the Finance Bill 2025? What concerns you most about the Finance Bill 2025? And I'll just go through those feedbacks. On WhatsApp, Peter Ndungu says they're introducing new taxes on meat packaging and hygiene items will be forced to raise prices and customers are already struggling. The finance bill is killing local trade. That's Peter Ndungu on WhatsApp on his sentiments on the finance bill. And Rukia Mohammed says almost every beauty product now has a higher tax. My customers are mostly young women who can't afford these new prices. It feels like the government does not care about small businesses. That's Rukia Mohammed. Samuel Kariuki says importing a basic electronic is already expensive, but the finance bill makes it even worse. This discourages businesses and cuts off access to tech in rural areas. And those are some of the sentiments that you've sent through on our People's Dialogue. And at this point, we've come to the close of the People's Dialogue. Remember, we're dissecting the Finance Bill 2025. Many thanks for keeping us company from 6 up to this time. My name is Bentura Kumbuka. Do have yourself a very good night. Bye for now.